Welcome to the Workers' World Labour Show. I'm your host, Helge Janssen-Daubia. Over the past year, we've looked at COVID-19, the lockdown, and how it's impacted on various groups of workers and communities. In today's show, we take a closer look at our most vulnerable groups of workers, foreign migrant street traders, who are self-employed, and we look at how COVID-19 conditions have impacted them. Before we get into the discussion, let's take a look at an insert produced by the Workers' World Media Productions editorial team.
Lockdown had a disproportionate impact on informal workers. In South Africa, we've got good labour market data, and certainly from the second quarter of 2020, the quarterly labour force survey data suggested 1.5 million people, informal workers, lost their jobs. So, I think in this crisis, there's a real acknowledgement that informal workers were particularly hard hit. They are the people who don't have resources to fall back on. They don't have savings. And we were hearing from across the country, from informal worker organisation leaders, high levels of food insecurity. So people were really struggling to feed their families, and particularly children. So it had a devastating impact.
Well, before COVID, the problem still is the lack of infrastructure. We have been crying out for an enabling environment for so long. We've been engaging government for the years and years. And there's a lot of talk shops that has happened between ourselves and government, but the enabling environment has not been set up as yet. As you can see today, we all have all different types of structures, covers, etc. There's no uniformity for us. There's no water supply in most of the markets. There's no toilet facilities. So there is a need for much better social protection from government for the informal workers to come up to par with the formal workers of South Africa.
The harassment from JMPD, and also the issue that during 2013 they were taken out of the street. There were clean sweep campaign that really affected the life of the vendors or the traders at large.
During lockdown, the thing, it was like the first days when they say, people, can we stay in your houses? We were not able to move from house to house, even to wear a mask, because if you can come from your house to someone's house, they will say, maybe you bring COVID to me. So, and it was, I think, towards month end, yet we were supposed to collect money from the people. And I don't have someone who was paying me. Some, they were better because from their bosses they were getting paid. Me, I didn't even send because I was supposed to go and collect my money from the people whom I sold my things. So there was nothing. And the thing, we were even sitting at home, no delivering of things, because we have to deliver things to get money from them. So it was very difficult for me. I had no even food in the house. And I was even remembering people in Zimbabwe, they had nothing, the one who depend on me. Like my mom, I buy even hair tablets from here, from South Africa, then I send them home. In that time, there were no even transport going to Zimbabwe to give the tablets. So it means they were going to make a plan to buy them in Zimbabwe, but in Zimbabwe it's expensive.
For the lockdown, means at least means of surviving, business was a little bit okay, you understand? At least people you can know that maybe end of the month, those that customers, they can support you, you can get some little things. But since after the lockdown, it was dead. To put food on the table is so difficult. To pay school fees for a child is so difficult. Even to eat sometimes is so difficult. Sometimes you come out here, you don't even sell anything.
Before the COVID, things was good and everything, nobody's complaining and I'm not complaining. And I can save some things and to send for my family at home. But since of COVID, I couldn't get myself. Even to pay my house rent, I'm suffering to pay it. And even now, to pay it, I'm still struggling.
If you look at our statistics on the Grand Parade, you'll probably find that 70% of our traders here are from other countries, from the rest of Africa. So they are, I'd say, very hardworking people, and they sustain their trade daily on the parade.
The government lied and said that there is a funding that they have released for small businesses. But when we visited or when we went to the offices of Minister of Small Business, only to find out that informal sector was not accommodated to it. And then on the migrant side also, they were affected because remember, they are not included in any funding or anything that South African citizens benefit in this country.
It's very difficult. My business, the lockdown, it kept me down too much. It's very quiet, the business. Yeah, but we try to keep on, try to sell it. Yes, it's very difficult.
At least if there's any way, because I see now they're supporting South African citizens by giving them some money and few things. Now, if they can be able to support, despite whether you are from Congo or you're from Nigeria or you're from Malawi, if they can be able to help other people, it will be very nice.
Unfortunately, I don't get any government from support. But actually here in the Senegal community, we have Foundation Mofatu Business Daira, where we help one another.
There is no support from the government, I won't lie to you. But during the lockdown, I think the government, they organized some funding for the food and all those things, the provision for the people that got the asylum and all those things. But we really don't get it because there are a lot of foreigners, you understand, then you can't go everywhere. You can satisfy everybody, you understand. So we actually don't get any support from the government. Even from the business industry, we don't get support from the government. We have to start from the scratch and do it on ourselves.
Is this critical issue of social protection? So we started to get informal workers into the social security net. The special COVID grant, it's not very much, so the issues around the amount, and yet it's put in place critical infrastructure to start something like a universal basic income. So again, the thinking here is that you get monies into the economy, into the hands of poor people. It allows them to take risks, to find jobs, to start their own businesses, but also there's monies in the hands of consumers. So we're seeing very depressed demand. So for example, the vendors that we're in constant contact with through our networks are saying that they actually aren't customers. So if you've got to find mechanisms of getting monies into the hands of poor people.
Welcome back. You're watching the Workers' World Labour Show. Let's cross over to our remote studio where Michaela Miller will take us through this week's labour news highlights.
Thanks, Helga. In this week's highlights, a group of suspected looters engage in a peace dialogue about the recent looting spree in Alexandra Township, Johannesburg. Lucky Star and Almawandle pelagic fishing workers on strike. And moving abroad, workers who are with a union are better protected against COVID-19. All this and more, do stay tuned for the full bulletin. For now, it's back to this week's discussion.
Welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're watching the Workers' World Labour Show, and we're talking the impact of COVID-19 on informal traders. Rashida, thank you for joining us, and let's start with you. The impact of COVID-19, of course, predates the participation of informal traders in our economy. Give us an overview of the informal trader sector and the involvement of foreign nationals in the sector.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Yes, indeed, the informal sector is probably currently the biggest business sector in the country. And one can only realize that because the informal business sector has been and remains to be the saving grace of the unemployed. And we know unemployment is rising and rising. So the informal economy workers is made up of retrenched people, many foreign migrants in South Africa. And I must add here that foreign migrants has been with us for more than 20 years. And even before that, we've had, many traders coming from Zimbabwe, Malawi, Eswatini, and it is an industry that has developed. I'm calling the informal sector an industry, but it is definitely a sector that can no longer be ignored by government. We, as SAITA, the South African Informal Traders Alliance, have our presence in all 9 provinces of South Africa. And we are recognized by the government, in particularly the Department of Small Business Development, as a very important role player in the economy of South Africa, as we contribute greatly to the GDP. And we have found that, throughout our provinces, we have the migrant traders, and they become part and parcel of the sector. If they trade in a specific area where there's an organization, they, like the local traders, become part of the membership of that organization. It is definitely the largest job creator in our country. And it's not only street traders. We are talking about home-based industries. We're talking about waste pickers, spaza shops is very big. Backyard businesses. We have so many informal traders operating from home because government has just not made enough employment available for us. So insofar as the origins of these migrant workers in our country, they are from all over. And in particularly, I would say that, West, East, and Central Africa countries features mostly. And in particular, that we have noticed here in Cape Town, where I do trade myself on the Grand Parade, where very many Nigerians, Senegalese, from Angola, we have Tanzania, and Somalis, very, very big as well in the informal sector. So yes, indeed, the informal economy is a growing one. It's expanding. And as SAITA, we want to ensure that the voice of these informal traders are heard and that their rights are protected.
Thank you for that, Rashida. Lyle, I'd like to bring you in here, Human Rights Development Officer at Africa Unite. So Rashida sketches the picture that the informal traders as an industrial sector is one of the biggest contributors to the economy. She said it was the saving grace of the unemployed, absorbing both unemployed, formerly unemployed, and foreign migrants. It is one of the largest job creators, and yet there are many challenges and negative perceptions around foreign migrant workers, foreign nationals in the sector. Can you give us a sense of what those negative perceptions are and what the responses should potentially be to that?
Well, thank you everybody. Well, this has been a constant issue in South Africa, and most of us only remember xenophobic attitudes and attacks going back to 2008. But in reality, this has been happening since the 90s, since we became a democratic state. And this has always been a system of othering people. It's always very easy to create a boogeyman and always a bit easier to create a other in order to place blame on. And this has been the case with foreign nationals in South Africa. This is not unique to South Africa. This happens all over the world. We see it happening in Europe currently. It's happening in the United States. It's just what makes South Africa unique is that this generally spills over into violent attitudes. And when working with these specific groups, particularly in previously disadvantaged communities like the townships and in the Cape Flats, we find that it's generally just misconceptions about foreign nationals, where they get their jobs, how they come about earning income and so forth. So it's misinformation being spread We could see that with the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, people thought, they called it the China virus. They said it came from China. But in reality, this wasn't the case, and we saw people being stigmatized because of that. So this is what happens with job loss or job creation and so forth. Migrants generally get blamed for all the social ills because it's easier to blame an outside person as opposed to actually looking within and dealing with these issues. I like that Rashida actually pointed out that the informal trading sector actually contributes a lot to the economy. I think it's estimated at between 3 to 6 billion rand annually. That's how much it contributes to our economy, and that's a lot for an informal sector. When we tackle these issues, however, we try to make people and communities particularly aware about the situations that many of these migrants come from. As Rashida pointed out, many of them come from Central, East, and West Africa. And as we know, as a country like Somalia, where we had a collapsing government for decades, many people are escaping poverty, war, famine. Many of these foreign nationals coming to South Africa also have to deal with illnesses where they have collapsed healthcare systems. So coming to South Africa is like coming to a safe haven. I personally have experienced this traveling through East and North Africa, seeing where these people come from or what they've experienced. And it's really disappointing that as South Africans coming through such a scarred past, that we would now turn around and treat other people the way we were once treated. We other people where once we were othered as non-white South Africans.
Thank you, Lyle.
And this is really important.
Yeah, thank you, Lyle. I want to bring, before we go to our break, I want to bring Hilton Berg, Program Manager at the Scalabrini Center, into this part of the discussion. Hilton, we've seen and experienced as the city and in fact across the country, the xenophobia that have arisen as people compete for resources. But what are some of the main challenges over the last decade or so that foreign migrants and informal traders do experience when they want to trade on the street?
I think one of the big things is getting permits. They're usually excluded from getting permits from government organizations, be it local or national. So they get moved around from location to location. So sometimes they've been sitting at a place for a long time, and suddenly the municipality changes bylaws or whatever, and they have to move. And those are the kind of challenges. They also obviously they are kind of not seen, so they kind of just left behind. And
Hilton, we seem to be having a gremlin in the system. Hilton, so we're going to ask our producer just to dial you back into the call. But I want to go back to Rashida. There were some things that Hilton had spoken about, the issue of not having permits, of being moved around because municipal bylaws change, etc. And yet, Rashida, you said that there was recognition of street traders by the Department of Small Businesses. So if there is government recognition, why is it still difficult for street traders, in particular foreign national street traders, to conduct business?
Yes, indeed. You must bear in mind that South Africa has three spheres of government. We have local government, provincial government, and national government. Now, with the lobbying of SAITA, at a national level, we have achieved that recognition and we're participating. That is why I've got to leave it too. We are participating very much at the national level. However, you find at a local level that municipalities are still very draconian in their processes, and that you'll find that there is lots of victimization. And that is why SAITA is out, trying to get information from all plus 300 municipalities to get reports to SAITA so that we can address it at that level. Indeed, there are severe issues of permits for migrants as well as for the
Rashida, sorry, man. Can I ask you just to hold on with that? We have to go to a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our discussion. Welcome back if you've just joined us. We're talking informal street traders and the impact of COVID-19. Rashida, before the break, you were giving us a sense of the challenges in terms of different laws that get switched around at the different levels of government. Continue, Rashida.
Yes, just what's currently happening, we have heard that the Minister of Small Business Development has gazetted, for example, now that permit fees are waived, and that for the up until December 2022, we will not be paying fees. Now, even that, as a gazette, is problematic to local government. Currently, our informal traders are being told you have to pay. So again, SAITA has to act at a national level to ensure that it's implemented at the local levels. So yes, indeed, the accessing of permits is already a big issue. There is not enough market space for the informal traders. As you know, we are bursting by the sides based on the fact that there's so many unemployed. We are getting requests and people need to earn a survival. And the easiest way to earn a survival is to go out and be an informal trader. The entry levels are less. But with law enforcement, harassment and confiscation of stock, etc., we have embarked upon a no harm campaign. And I'm sure later Patton will be talking about that to you. So yes, the challenges are great, but it's in solidarity with all our organizations that we are fighting for the rights of informal traders, irrespective, local or migrant, to be able to earn a decent living in South Africa. But the challenges are real and it's ongoing day by day.
Thank you for that, Rashida. Hilton, the signal was a bit sketchy before, but I want to bring you in here. Lyle spoke about this notion of othering that which is different to us as South Africans, and coupled with that, of course, is the survivalist competition between people who are poor. But migrants that have come, foreign nationals that have come into South Africa, they don't come with no skills. Give us a sense of the kinds of people. We know that they've escaped economic hardship and civil war, but the kinds of people that are willing to come and make a life in South Africa and bring their skills. What are we missing in our economy? What are we missing in our society that can add value?
That's such a broad question. So obviously they are human. I think that's what we kind of try to get away from, is that there are people that are just trying to make a better life for themselves. And unfortunately, they can't do that in their own country. And they as Lyle said, they see South Africa as a safe haven. They range from the educated people. Most of the people that we encounter, and I run the employment access help desk, the employment access program. And most of them have matric at least. They come in with degrees from engineering to nurses to doctors. There's lawyers and everything else in the whole spectrum of degrees. They want to learn. I find that our clients, besides being humble and very resilient, I think for me, for one thing is that they are so resilient. To travel from where they come to South Africa takes a lot. I don't think I'll be able to do it. And so they have so much resilience, and they really want to improve their life, not only for themselves, but for their families. And then they come to South Africa, and there's so many barriers for them. Obviously, so yeah, so I don't know if that gives you enough.
It does. Thank you. So, Lyle, the picture that Hilton sketches is that these are people, economic migrants, or people escaping real violence, civil wars, but they come ready to participate and to add to our society, but we seem to be missing the boat. Lyle?
No, that's really accurate. We need to keep in mind that many migrants, asylum seekers, or refugees coming to South Africa, the countries that they come from achieved independence long before South Africa. So their education systems were generally better set up for a globalized economy. So when they come to South Africa, many of them have a higher education level than the average South African, and that's not sneering at my colleagues or my fellow South Africans is just that their education, their primary and secondary education systems were very well set up, and they were geared to take part of a globalized economy. So what Hilton said is absolutely correct, and it's something that as South Africans we should constantly keep in mind.
We're also joined by Pat Horn. Thank you and welcome, Pat. If you can unmute yourself, we'd love to have you part of the discussion before Rashida leaves. So if you're with us, hi Pat, thank you. We're joined by Pat Horn, Senior Advisor to StreetNet International. Pat, I know you've been on the line and you've been listening to some of the discussions. Can you give us some insight from the perspective of StreetNet International as to what the experiences are of street traders in South Africa, particularly foreign migrant street traders? Rashida's given us a sense, and we can see that even through our government system, there's creeping prejudice that marginalizes foreign street traders. Pat?
Yes, I'm not going to repeat what Rashida has said. She's made a lot of very critical points, so I'm going to mention some additional issues. The first issue, which was implied in what she was saying, all street traders are discriminated against and marginalized in South Africa. Non-South Africans are also discriminated and marginalized. In the street trade sector, often the discrimination is equal, and in some cases it's worse. But, you know, when we started to assist street barbers in Durban, who are mainly from Central Africa, we took up a case of discrimination against them. And during the course of that case, the Durban municipality was informed by their lawyers that their discrimination was illegal. So they stopped that extra discrimination against the foreigners. But then the non-South Africans came to us to complain that, no, they've still got problems, but now the problems they were complaining about were the same problems they were sharing with all the other street vendors. So at least now they were in the same boat, because all street vendors in South Africa are discriminated against. And with our municipalities, as Rashida has said, there is uneven compliance with you know, various requirements, whether it's constitutional or legal or whatever. So some municipalities avoid that discrimination, others don't. I think the other issue is that the status of non-South African workers in the informal economy has never been properly regularized, in the sense that there's no work permit available for people who don't work in the formal economy. So when somebody comes into the country to trade on the street, they normally come through the borders, they declare their goods, they say we're coming in to sell these goods, they pay tariffs on those goods, but then they get given a tourist visa or something like that, because there is no work permit for informal workers. There's a work permit for formal workers who have some sort of a contract with employers, but then what happens is they get harassed on the street for trading on a tourist visa, which they got given because there is no appropriate work permit. Now, sometimes you'll have the Department of Small Business Development saying that for a certain kind of a requirement that they're doing for informal traders, they must have a special visa. That visa doesn't exist for the workers in the informal economy. So there's actually a gap in the immigration law and the immigration requirements, whereby people in the informal economy can't get permits.
Pat, I'm going to ask you to press pause on that very important point, which is the gap within the current regulatory system. When we come back, we're going to continue our discussion with Pat Horn, Lyle Breda, and Hilton Berg on informal traders.
Welcome back to Workers World Labour News. I am Michaela Miller. We hope you're keeping safe and warm. Thanks for joining us. A group of self-confessed looters gathered at the Alexandra police station on Thursday where they volunteered information about the involvement with no police officer taking their statements. They were invited into the boardroom to join a peace dialogue facilitated by a social worker, where they were given the chance to explain what drove the unrest that crippled large parts of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng this week before last. Thursday morning session began with participants describing how they first got involved in the looting. Most saw the looters falling into two categories: the instigators, who were the real criminals, and the hungry, who took only food and things they desperately needed. Participants described being woken in the night and told local shops were open. Some of those who chose not to loot spoke of fear and a sense of violation. The effects of the looting are still being felt this week. Soldiers remain in Alex, shops are empty, food prices have rocketed and ATMs have been destroyed, so people have to leave the area to draw money. Another participant added that they just wanted a platform to speak to government where they can listen and respond to them and don't want to be ignored anymore. Nearly 1,200 members from the Food and Allied Workers Union FAHU, employed by Oceana Fishing and the Lucky Star Amawandle pelagic operation in St. Helena Bay and Laiplek on the West Coast, were in the 7th day of a protected strike after wage talk failed at the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration at the CCMA. According to FAHU, their members had no other alternative but to dispute adverse changes in their working conditions. Earlier wage talks between the parties had failed to reach an agreement, as the employer is also attempting to unilaterally enforce conditions of employment and restructure the business. To this end, Oceana is proposing a salary freeze, suspension of salary or wage increases for the 2021 and 2022 financial year. This will worsen the crisis of unemployment, poverty and inequality in these fishing communities. In addition, the company is aiming an even bigger blow against the workers. It intends downgrading employees' status from permanent employees to seasonal workers, which in effect will mean that workers who had operated on a 40 to 45-hour week will now be expected to operate on a minimum of 2 standard shifts of only 18 hours per week, and drastically reducing their income. This will undoubtedly worsen the members' economic situation, and FAHU has stated that it will not just sit back without a fight. Workers' World wonders whether this will include workers taking over ownership and control of the factories. And in international news, more than 200 union leaders participated in the webinar COVID-19 and Occupational Disease, where frontline workers are best protected, organized by Uni Global Union and Argentina Healthcare Union FATSA, which highlighted the fundamental role unions play in safeguarding workers during the pandemic. This comes after a global study by the Uni Global Union and ITUC found that recognizing COVID-19 as an occupational disease could make a huge difference for workers, and unions are pushing to make it happen. Since the start of the health crisis, many governments have failed to protect workers, and it was the unions that made the difference, as in this case of Peru, where COVID-19 was recognized as an occupational disease thanks to joint union action by La Coordinadora da Salud. In this regard, Owen Tuduro, Deputy General Secretary of the ITUC, said that this would make government more accountable and lead to greater compliance with the core ILO conventions of healthcare and safety at work. That's a wrap from the news. If you have any story you'd like to share with us, you can send a WhatsApp message or voice note to 081 552 4551. Or simply email us at labor@wwmp.org.za. This week's topic of discussion is the informal migrant workers, which Helga will conclude.
Thank you, Michaela. If you've just joined us, you're watching the Workers' World Labour Show. Patton, before the news bulletin, you were giving us an explanation of how the gap in the regulatory framework, there doesn't in fact exist permits which give people certain permissions to trade, to work, etc.
I'm talking about migration type permits. I'm not talking about trading permits. I'm saying that work permits are a very specific type of an instrument in migration law. And they do exist for non-South Africans who come in and have some sort of a contract with an employer in the country, and work permits exist for those kinds of workers. Nevertheless, because there are quotas of the number of non-South Africans that are allowed to be employed in many formal businesses, as Rashida has mentioned, most of the people who come here, and there are economic migrants, there are refugees, and there are asylum seekers, and those are three different categories. With refugees and asylum seekers, there's a certain kind of a permit that they can apply for. There's normally a backlog, so very often people who are entitled to those don't have them because of problems in home affairs. But with economic migrants who come in with normal passports, there isn't a work permit in particular, even though they would probably declare what they've come into the country for and be admitted into the country and even be made to pay tariffs on the goods which they bring in. So they comply with everything they're asked to do.
Pat, can I just interrupt you for a second, and maybe this is just for some clarity as well. But the way that you describe things, it would seem that, look, there was civil war in Côte d'Ivoire. Senegal, people coming from over the border from Senegal as economic migrants, and a whole range of other disruptions to normal life in the rest of the continent, with people obviously looking for better opportunities. That predates COVID. It predates even the last 5 years. And yet, the Department of Home Affairs have not caught up. If I've been here as a economic migrant or as a refugee for a decade, my life has not stood still. I perhaps have married, I've gotten a family, but still my status is in limbo. I just want you to give perhaps commentary, because I think that might be the experience of many families across Cape Town, for example.
Look, you have confused a couple of issues. The people whose countries have had civil wars are normally the people who apply for refugee status or asylum seeker status. The refugees and asylum seekers are people that are fleeing war situations or situations of political violence in their countries. That didn't apply so much to Côte d'Ivoire and Senegal, certainly not Senegal. It applied to the DRC and to Zimbabwe, and there was a particular category of in relation to Zimbabwe. The economic migrants are people who come here to do work. They're not necessarily fleeing a situation of violence in their countries. So they will come in with passports. They wouldn't get in if they didn't have passports. So basically the economic migrants then are, in terms of the migrant law, the immigration law, they're a different category from asylum seekers and refugees who have to get given documents here. The economic migrants come with their documents from their countries. They don't get given documents in South Africa. But certainly once people stay and they intermarry, many non-South Africans have become naturalized South African citizens. And refugees and asylum seekers can also be naturalized once they've stayed a certain amount of time. So of course, there are many people who were not born in South Africa who live here now, but who have South African citizenship or permanent residency. So there's lots of different categories. But I think the main thing is to make this distinction between the asylum seekers and refugees on the one hand, who are fleeing something, and the economic migrants, of which many of the informal traders are economic migrants. Many of the people that Rashida has mentioned fall into that category. Very often the public doesn't understand the difference, and they get equally discriminated against once they don't speak our languages or whatever. But of course, many of them have remained, and now we have many mixed families. So as it's happened over the years when migrants have come to countries and then they've stayed. I mean, we all came from migrants at some stage or another. Somebody among our ancestors was a migrant and ended up staying here. So, that's a broader point. That applies generally to everybody and not specifically to street traders. So, I mean, if we want to get back to the street trader issue, then those people who have to do informal work, which is an increasing number of people in the country, including an increasing number of South Africans. If you want to get back to the question of COVID and the recent violent riots that we've just had, many people have lost jobs. So the number of people joining the informal economy has increased. And this is not a South African, non-South African issue. There is more competition for space. And very often when there's competition for space and there's conflict or contestation between people in the sector, that can take on the issue of discriminating against migrant then becomes worse again. And as we're having in Durban, an old issue that we've always had is Indian-African tensions flare up again. So, you know, it's important to usually distinguish between what is the cause of the issue. Is it the way that sector is being treated? In this case, we're talking about a sector which is invisibilized, or is it specific to the migrant status? And sometimes there's a bit of both.
Pat, we're going to have to go to a break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation. Welcome back. We're going to continue our conversation. Hilton, I'd like to bring you into this part of the conversation. We want to talk specifically now about how the lockdown conditions have impacted informal street traders, particularly the people who use the services of Scalabrini. How did lockdown impact them?
Well, I think and it's across all the informal sector. They were devastated. They really don't have any backup support from government to a large degree. So they've essentially lost their income. So there was no place, obviously, for them to sell the things. The things the goods that were supposed to come into the country couldn't come into the country. So lots of them had to spend, obviously, their savings and now hopefully they're starting from scratch again. I think also there was a sense of isolation. A lot of our foreigners, and I think it's probably most informal traders, the English, lack of low levels of English is very much hampering, as well as the computer literacy, and then obviously money for data, which we find on a day-to-day basis just on hand. And so that sense of isolation, I think, has been increased because of the lockdown, because even the services that we want to give them, we are kind of isolated from them because of the pandemic, essentially. So yeah, so I think a lot of people are really, there's been quite a bit of devastation in lots of households.
Pat, if you can maybe just give us a sense, because Hilton, of course, frames the isolation and the lack of access to resources of any kind as being a real obstacle, which is, of course, not unique to foreign street traders. But Rosita, before she left, gave us a sense that there was government support. In fact, the President's address this past Sunday spoke specifically about supporting businesses who had been hard knocked, both by the civil unrest 2 weeks ago, but also by COVID-19. Would foreign street traders be part of that, be able to access those help links? Pat?
So Hilton is quite correct that there's been no cushion for people in the informal economy. Since the beginning of COVID, which, as you know, was more than a year ago, all the talk about relief for people in the informal economy has not been materializing, whereas the relief for the formal sector has been materializing. So for the past 15 months, we've been people like Rashida, myself, all of us who are sitting in certain forums have been talking about the fact that this promised relief has not been appearing. The riots of 2 weeks ago seem to have made the government wake up. Suddenly, they're kind of aware, because of all the looting that happened, that there was no cushion for people in the informal economy. When they went back to work after the COVID lockdowns, they found that they couldn't earn as much income as they used to make before, With informal traders, their market had gone, a lot of their customers had lost jobs, people were not coming to the spaces where they used to come before. They just sold a whole lot less for the same amount of work. Waste pickers found that waste material prices had dropped. They could work the same number of hours but make much less money because the prices had dropped. So we've been having a situation of COVID where people in the informal economy have been in increasing distress, using up all their savings. Now, this applied across the board. What was worse is that some of the relief got offered only to South African citizens. But there was pushback against that from informal workers, insisting that we are all in the same boat and you have to give the relief to all of us. So when food relief was given to waste pickers during April, May last year, and it was said it would only be for the South Africans, all of the waste pickers pushed back and basically ensured that it was distributed to everybody, including the non-South African waste pickers. There's also a tendency in the Department of Small Business Development, where Rashida's gone to now, to say that this is only available for non-South Africans. Fortunately, quite a few municipalities have lost court cases because of discriminating against non-South Africans, which has made them a little bit nervous about this. So when the traders push back and say, no, you've got to give the relief to all of us, then they have actually done that. So again, it's been unequal.
Thank you, Pat. Lyle, I want to bring you in here, Human Rights Development Officer at Africa Unite. Is there a growing, in the way that Pat describes, there seems to be almost a solidarity across lines, across different groups of workers, whether they are informal or formal. Definitely there seems to be growing solidarity. Is this a case of where there's discrimination, human rights violations against people who don't work, who are not born here, but who continue to live and contribute to the economy here? Is there a human rights case to be made?
I think so. I think people are becoming way more socially aware of what's going on around them. I actually like that Pat and Hilton had brought up these issues. What happened 2 weeks ago, I don't know if any of you can recall, there were actually attacks on migrants that became very violent. People's stores were burnt down. People's stores were actually burnt in Durban as well. And I mean, like this was unprecedented. And now it was basically forbearance for what happened 2 weeks ago. So why are we only taking note now? I think people are starting to realize that it doesn't just affect them, it affects everybody. And if we had taken note back then, we would have actually been able to take action now to kind of stint that growth of that kind of perception. But yes, I think there is a human rights case to be made. You see it happening in Mozambique now. People are becoming socially aware. People are feeling that we are all in this together. Yes, many people might make the case that we're all in different boats, but in the same storm. But the fact is we're all in the storm. And we are all going to be affected, irrespective of our socioeconomic or national identification or class. So yes, I think this is a constant driver of all NGOs and civil society organizations. We should continue pushing this and making people more aware of what's going on, that it's not just their plight, that it's our plight as well.
So Lyle, in our last segment, we have very little time left, but I'd like to know what Africa Unite, what is the next big campaign in the context of a post-COVID economy? How will you be supporting campaigns out there that might, and now I've lost the word, that might obstruct human rights?
Well, I think that's a great question to ask me. We have a program called skill sharing. So this is designed to create smooth interactions between people of other national identities and South Africans. Remember what we said earlier, that many come from economies and education systems that's more primed to a global economy. So we use this to educate South Africans. So it's a way of migrants showing South Africans that they can give back. But it's also a way of South Africans working in solidarity. So this is one of our programs that we work with among our information systems that we actually run.
Thank you. Hilton, very quickly, Scalabrini Center, what is on your agenda in less than 5 seconds?
What we want to do is advocate, obviously, for the rights of foreign nationals, and to try and integrate them as much as possible into South African society, where they want to fit.
Thank you. Pat Horn, StreetNet International, in this very, very precarious moment that we're going into, what is on the agenda for StreetNet International?
StreetNet works through its affiliates in South Africa, South African Informal Traders Alliance, that Rashida comes through, the Do No Harm campaign, no harassment of traders or evictions, no confiscations, and no discrimination against non-South Africans.
You have it. Look out for those campaigns on social media and in the media from us here at the Labour Show. Thank you to all our guests for taking the time, to Rashida that had to leave early. So from all of us, till next time. Thank you, everybody. Thanks very much for all your time.